Good evening, everyone. This is the Nagog Hill Orchard Ad Hoc Working Group meeting for December 15th. We'll call the meeting to order at 6 p.m. Our agenda tonight is to recap our last meeting, which was held on December 8th. We're going to have group member updates. Then we're going to have an update on orchard assessment and pruning. We're going to review our action item calendar, talk about next steps, and approve meeting minutes from November 10th and December 1st, 2021. So we had our meeting was held last week on December 8th. There was a lot of discussion with respect to the timeline. We put together our action item, the first draft of our action item calendar. We talked about specific tasks for each members of the group, and on how to move the process forward with respect to who's going to reach out to who, how we're going to get going with pruning the orchard, which we determined is something that needs to be done in the short term. We talked about reviewing APR links. We also had town council present at our meeting as well to talk about APR restrictions on the property and what we can and can't do and how we should, what we need to look at going forward. We're definitely going to need town council to come back in at some point to talk to us. We talked about the pruned wood that's on the property and some ideas to remove that. And we talked about just moving forward with the RFP process. So, Joe, do you want to add anything to that?
Sure. Thanks, Cindy. So, as I've had conversations with some of the other contacts, I've just been sending the working group summaries. One of the things is at least there's a fair amount of consistency as far as recommended approaches by some of the orchardists that I've talked to, and specifically, concentrating on a manageable amount of orchard, and some recommendations as far as then how to handle the other areas that really would be above and beyond what could be managed by the town or by an orchardist at the time being. So I had also sent off revised sort of like a bid request to try to solicit more specific pruning costs. That's in draft for us to discuss, and can easily start to get some costs together to then be able to provide to select board to support requests for funding. I do have a site visit scheduled tomorrow with the operator of Stormalong Cider. He was one of the people that had reached out to me as well, just inquiring about the orchard. And over the next week, I'll be finalizing the site visit with John Clement from UMass Agricultural Extension Service.
And who's the first person that you mentioned, Joe? What was that name?
His first name's Shannon. I have it on the spreadsheet. What was the last name? Shannon Edgar with Stormalong Cider.
Okay. Okay. And that's tomorrow?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, good. So we can start now. I think that's pretty much a recap of the last meeting. Joe, do you have any other, we'll go into group member updates. Do you have anything to add to that, or?
That's basically at those summaries, and just look forward to just having a discussion as far as just trying to identify next steps. What are we going to be working on, and things that we can try to move along as far as scheduling additional meetings and meetings even with the select board.
Okay. All right, good. So Jen, do you have any thing for group member updates?
Yep, absolutely. I spoke with Jared Byrne this morning and he is interested and he wanted to do a site visit. He is swamped this week, but he said he would give me a shout Monday morning. I told him that was something that had to be arranged with Joe. So expect some sort of call either from him or from me on Monday. And he's the one from Berlin Orchards.
Oh, okay.
Yep. So, and when I looked at your, the summary, I thought it looked great on the bid form. I did have one quick question on the bid form. It says, this bid includes addenda. What does that mean? I guess I'm not familiar with that.
That would be if we had changes. So, realistically, there probably aren't. Addenda are just sort of codified changes. Like if we all of a sudden said, you know what, you have to do X, Y, and Z. And that was something that was done, that was distributed after. You just want to make sure that if it includes any addenda that they're spelled out. So realistically, for this purpose, we probably wouldn't have anything.
Okay. So here's one other question. Is this bid form that you sent us, is this something I should or could send to Jared ahead of time so he kind of has an idea of what we're looking for? Or do you want me to hold off until he walks with you?
I'd recommend just holding off until it walks with me. I mean, one of the things is that, if we end up finalizing, I would need to make sure that I knew like who received it, make sure that I can track it, so that there's no one that says, hey, I never had an opportunity to look at it, or I submitted it but didn't. So we always like to know who it goes out to and all that. So, if it is something that then like, hey, let's run with it. And again, we can solicit bids. We don't have to award anything.
Okay.
So if the committee decides like, hey, let's start getting some harder figures. Like I said, when I was talking and Sean O'Neill basically verified what Pat had said, is that you're looking at trimming costs around $7 up to $15 a tree. And that you do calculate it based on a tree basis.
Yep.
That the 15 are where they are overgrown, haven't been managed for a long time. So realistically, we could be between the $7 and $10 figure. And approximately there's 2,000 trees. So we can basically say, upper end, we could be at $20,000.
Okay.
That then at least gives me enough information to know that I just can't call up 3 people, that I would have to at least have some sort of written response in the form of a quote back. And that's what that bid form really helps with.
Okay.
Can I ask a question? I hate to interject, but and this is for both Joe and Jen. Are we able to have just a summary of scope? I recognize all the protocol that has to be followed forward with a bid form, but it's nice to just have a written summary, almost like a glossary of the orchard, so that it is a little bit of a handout. So if Jen's saying, so people understand the scope, like this is how many acres, this is how many trees, so that everyone's able to have that same talking point that obviously Joe, you have with everyone. But I would want Jen to have those same talking points.
Yeah. No, totally get it. And the memo that would go along with that bid form basically identifies it. Work shall be done on approximately 80 acres containing approximately 2,000 trees. Include maps that are attached with overall location and overall size. Identify time frame. So the memo has it. Now it becomes a question whether or not you sort of want, say, something a little bit more digestible. We can easily refine things if we needed to be a little bit more simplistic than what I have.
Yep.
So I guess what I'm asking for is less refinement and just more bullet points to say, obviously, so that we can, if there's someone that is not familiar with the region that may be interested in just taking a peek and not even going forth to a bid. I would hate to exclude someone who's saying it's like, okay, we're really looking at people that can only bid. There might be people that could offer expertise, but to be able to say, we're looking at 2,000 trees, and they understand how long it takes to walk 2,000 trees on X amount of blocks. So I was just curious.
I think what we
Okay.
have would easily meet that, and it could be simplified more to basically have it all on one sheet, and to have that that price chart as well. The reason why it's a second sheet is that they just have to respond with that. Just submit it, sign it, and you're all set. And the table basically just says, here's the number of trees, put in your cost per tree, and what's the total.
All right.
It's
So I guess
fairly straightforward.
My question would be, can Jen and can other committee members share just that one sheet and not the bid form, so that someone doesn't have to commit to ultimately looking at a bid, that we may have the opportunity to just say, here is what we're looking at. Let us know if you want to go to step 2. I'd like to try and see if we can get more people into just kind of step 1.
Okay, so
Sarah, are you talking about just the pruning aspect?
Yes. Yep.
So if you're
here again, Jenna, it may be other aspects as well.
So
Yes.
I think what we could do is we could more easily have something that then is just and use pictures, and it can still be one sheet. Basically have a little bit of background for the orchard, identify the area, have a photo of the area, and basically say, we're looking at, here's the bounds, and we're looking for a cost estimate based on per tree. Here's the estimated number of trees, and is this something you'd be interested in, and what would your cost be? It can be more simplified. The issue is that we need to be able to compare, and that's where the set expectation. It's like, okay, well, if this is something you're interested in, then we can follow up with that request for quote.
Exactly. I'm just trying to get more players into the orchard.
Yep.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Sarah. So just to clarify, Joe, on the bid form, field 4 and field 5, are you saying that's 80 acres of land?
No.
Because
Let me
I
just
thought you
make
just
sure.
said summary and scope, 80 acres of land, 2,000 trees. I just want to make sure that we're just focusing on field 4 and field 5.
Yeah, and I should have said, and sorry if I misspoke, I should have said just under 20 acres.
Okay. But that's still 2,000 trees.
Correct.
On those two, on field 4 and field 5, it's that many trees.
Correct. Yes.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to be clear. And so we talked about, or one of the recommendations was to focus on the orchard bound by Neshoba Road and Nagog Hill. But that really just focuses on, well, I guess it's kind of the corner of Neshoba and Nagog, but it's going up more towards Nagog.
So that's where
Yes,
you know,
you
we're
would want to
talking
focus
about
on those, especially if you're looking at healthy trees, 4 or 5 potentially.
Yeah, I just
3.
want to just want to make sure that that is the 2 that in that memo that we had received, that they said they feel the trees, we actually had 2 orchardists that said that they feel the trees in that area are in the best condition, and that was what we were going to focus on. Okay.
I apologize because I was obviously calling in and a little lapse on the last meeting. I know that we've had 2 people out. Are we still entertaining? So for instance, when I believe UMass has not been in presently.
Right.
So when they come in, they're looking at the complex in totality, correct? They're not just looking at like 4 and 5. Okay.
Right.
So I guess I'm a little hesitant to really push to have 4 and 5 until we've had, unless you all feel as though the 2 people that have come in that have looked at and all in agreement that 4 and 5 is the way to go. I would make sure that we've kept our options open to know, like, the health of all the trees, because I would hate to exclude, all the rock trees down on what you're calling field 13 and 14 and such as well.
When you say rock, do you mean the stone fruit?
Correct, in field 10.
Those are actually, you're right. They're right here in this location. You're on your phone, but I'm sharing my screen and circling the area where the stone fruit are. So you may not see it, but everyone else can see.
Right. Sorry.
I think we keep drifting off of the fact that we're kind of under a time crunch to get something done, to get something scheduled by February. So I don't think the intention is to ignore some of the other plots, but I think given our resources and our time frame, it's best to focus on field 4 and 5. But to your point, Sarah, to get something in totality, somebody to give us an overall view of the orchard, but a lot of these people, and one of them, Joe, you walked around with Pat Kay, and he has history with this particular orchard. And he and I also had a conversation about the health of the trees. And there was a recommendation, which you noted in your, what you sent us out, Joe, was that some of the trees he's recommending not even, going forward with removing some of those trees. So in order to get sort of cash, and to get a cash flow going, to be able to have healthy trees for Pick Your Own in 2022, it sounds like I just want to make sure that we focus on, what we can do in the short term to get this productive for 2022.
Right. And I agree with you, Jen. So if we've been already told, informed that field 4 and 5 have some relatively healthy trees, I think that's where we should initially focus. To Sarah's point, certainly we want to do an assessment of the entire orchard, at some point, but we need to start somewhere in the short term. And I'd rather focus first on 4 and 5 through the RFP process, but then also in conjunction with that, have somebody come in, UMass come in and do an assessment of the whole orchard. Just to keep the process moving forward, but we have to start somewhere. And like you said, you mentioned, Jim, we're under a time restraint.
And then just to ask
so if we, just one second, Amy. So if we can focus on 4 and 5 and get going on that, and then at the same time have UMass come in and provide an assessment of the remainder of the orchard, then that can be kind of phase 2 or step 2 of the whole process. Do you agree with me on that?
Yep.
So I think we also, and I know Amy would possibly chime in on this a little bit, that we also have to look at the retail value. So there are some trees that are different heritage heirloom that might be more suited for retail for a higher value as well. And so that's something that obviously we'll talk about a little bit later on.
Okay.
And it might be some of the newer varietals.
Right.
So are you talking about planting, or are you talking about
ones that already exist? Ones that already exist.
Do we know what trees are in 4 and 5?
Pat was basically saying that his recollection that they were primarily Max and Cortland's. That primarily is what I think he said like some Macoons. But that's primarily when I went out there a year and a half ago when they did have Pick Your Own. That's what it looked like. Was on they basically had like a one sheet sort of map of different variety. And while they indicated there was some different variety up in that area, when you looked at the apples, they actually looked almost all the same, either Max or Cortland.
There's some delicious back on field. I think it's 3 as well.
Yeah. And then just to, Cindy and Jen's point, well, I agree with that. And but also to Sarah's point, like, I don't see, Joe, maybe you can chime in, a reason why if we had someone come in and focus on 4 and 5 and sort of that process is going, and at the same time UMass comes in and makes their recommendations, if, if we have someone there, we can then redirect them to do additional work. I mean, is there a reason why? Would they have to submit an additional bid for that?
No, we still, if we then said, well, do the rest of the orchard, the rest of the, 50 acres, that would be different. But if we're under 50, we're fine. So it ends up really being, say, an issue really for the select board and finance as far as if we had to do any sort of reserve fund transfer, what's available. That's
Right.
That's going to be more of the issue. And also, what is an intermediate step that before we even get to annual town meeting? Because what happens if we're getting into that stage where it's like we need to start thinking and lining up spraying and that happens before town meeting and any availability, and if we haven't been able, or if we actively decide to hold off going off to RFP because we want to give things more time and consideration, we may need to sort of identify some of those steps. One of the things that Paul Kay thought was really doable was that he's like, you can absolutely have a pick your own season in the fall. Right. That this is something that the town could do and manage, at least for the short term, or work with people or contract with people to do it. And he had basically really said, but it's important to take your time, figure out what you want, what's important, what are the long-term goals. And even if the 4 and 5 are primarily max Portland's, that's still like people are going to pick your own for the ambiance. This isn't even the other fields, even if they have more of the varieties, the retail portion, that the use of the big trees is not what the retail does anymore. Right. And that if, and that's the interesting thing is like, we see all those big trees and he's like, if you're not going to be managing it, it's going to spread disease and pests and it's short time to replant and bring things in. And even Sean O'Neill's like, even in 4 and 5, you need to be looking at turning over 5% of the orchard every year. So in 20 years, you basically have a totally new orchard. Yep. That right. Trees are really only good for 20 years.
Can I ask a question? Joe, can I ask a question off topic in regards to if the focus is still a little bit on pick your own, are we trying to be progressive and where Charles owns all the equipment? Are we in a position where anyone's trying to procure old equipment that's there, whether it be, those cool sticks that people use or other things that he owns that are used, or are we just letting everything go? I'm not sure how the process is going as he's leaving.
Yeah, we can't, honestly, Sarah, we can't really talk about that.
Okay.
Right now.
That's fine. I just wanted
the select board's working with Charles.
Oh, good.
Certainly
great.
And if this committee comes back with a recommendation to the select board that says we're focusing on 4 and 5 in the short term, perfect. We're hoping to do some pick your own in the season. We can certainly have a discussion about equipment needs for that.
Perfect. Yeah. I knew it was off topic, so I appreciate that.
I appreciate the question. But certainly I think as far as going forward in the bigger picture, once we have an assessment of the entire orchard, the full orchard, I think that will give us a better idea of steps for going forward and potential uses for the orchard. But we do need to start somewhere. So I think 4 and 5 is the best place to do that. And as far as Sarah's comment about the RFP, putting together a little summary, certainly I think that's something that can be shared. I think it's best for it to be shared, facilitated through Joe, just so that we keep track of where it's going and what's coming back in, like who we have contacted or how that's been put out there. I guess we could put it out on the town website too. and all of those other outlets. But just to make sure that everything's going out and coming back through a centralized location as opposed to someone just emailing it to somebody on their own. I think it really needs to be facilitated through the TA's office or the town website. And there is some information that we do have currently in the RFP as far as background and history of the orchard and things like that, that I can pull together just to provide a summary for to Sarah's point. Jen, did you have anything else to share?
Nope. I spoke with Pat as well, and he was very optimistic about the orchard. He said, you have such a valuable asset. And we also talked about, he goes, the one lady you really need to get a hold of is Joanne DiNardo from Sholin Farms. And I said, yeah, we have one of the committee members has reached out, and he has known her for quite a long time. And he says it's really interesting how they set up their whole operation, how she used to be on the conservation administration, and now she's kind of the president of the Friends of Sholin Farms. And it was really interesting. He said how they're working with a lot of volunteers, kind of like the Reuben Hoare Library, how there's an arm, Friends of Reuben Hoare, that does a lot of the fundraising, and that's how Sholin Farms, to his knowledge, he says, and it's amazing what they've done over there. And they've had just a ton of volunteer hours and all sorts of things. And he mentioned that, yeah, she would probably be very willing to chat, which Amy already reached out to her. And it sounds like in the new year, we'll be doing that. So that sounds like a great resource. And then I also got a name of a place up called Patton Farms, which is up in the Hamilton, Mass area. As in George Patton, the military George Patton. Apparently this was in his family, and he donated some land as well, or the family donated some land. And there was an organization that he recommended that we reach out to that can help us work on the wording for the RFP. And he said they just got a nice young couple in to take over that orchard. So that's another resource. I have not had a call back from them yet either, but that's a conversation that I hope to have this week still, to see if we can get somebody to help us with the wording and things to look for.
Okay.
So.
All right, great. Thanks. Amy, do you have anything to share?
Not right now.
Sarah, do you have an update?
Am I muted or unmuted?
You're unmuted.
Unmuted.
Okay, good. I'm not quite sure what you wanted me to do from the last meeting. So I had updated. I did not know that I had a path that you wanted me to follow.
Yeah, I don't think there really was anything, to be more than you had already shared at the last meeting. I just didn't know if anything had come along.
I would love to know, getting back to the Patton farm with that young couple, there are some amazing sites that I with my business, only learned of in the last year or two, of people that are really looking to take on such a venture as this. And there's really some really cool websites that are really targeted to them. So I think going forward as a committee, if we hear of someone that's hired some other people, let's also step back and say, how did you find them? So I love the fact that they can help us write an RFP, but ultimately we want to find the people that would like to live in that house and take over such an adventure.
I'm just looking at, and Joe included it in his summary. It's called the Essex County Green Belt, is one of the things that Pat Kay had mentioned that we try to get a hold of. So that's about preservation of the farm and the lands and the orchard. So we can reach out to them as well.
Yeah, in terms of places.
Go ahead, Amy.
Sorry, just two places where it would attract people such as this young couple would be Good Food Jobs, and it's a national website for agriculture. That's a great place to post, and the fees are pretty reasonable. And then Tufts runs a listserv, and they have one of the listservs is eMass Craft. It's really geared to sort of young farmers, and that's a great place to post. And then Tufts also has another listserv, Boston Food Jobs is another listserv where you can post, and that's more local. Those two that I just mentioned are much more local, and anyone can kind of subscribe and post, and they're free.
Awesome. Thank you.
Paul, do you have anything to share with the group?
Hi, thanks. Yeah, I had a little trouble getting on earlier, but I've heard most of the meeting. I believe Joe hit on the two follow-up items I had from the last meeting, which were to contact both Sean O'Neill and Evan Chaput. And I know Joe has gone ahead and made those contacts, and that's good. The other thing I would mention in terms of some of the comparables that I haven't heard mentioned here, although we got close to it with the Patton Farm in Hamilton, is the City of Peabody owns a farm that when we bought this orchard, we went and met with those folks because, you know, it was at that time the closest thing comparable in terms of a city or town owning a active orchard or a farm. And we found that useful at the time. Of course, that was a long time ago. It may be well worth revisiting with those folks too, at least looking into what the status of that is.
Paul, was that Brooksby Farm?
That sounds right.
Yeah, that's the one Pat Kay runs. That's the contact we've had this whole time.
This is it's in the city of Peabody?
I believe he's either Danvers or Peabody, but it's called Brooksby Farm.
Yeah, I just Googled it. It's in Peabody, and they grow other things.
Yeah,
as
Pat's
well.
the one. Pat Kay is the one that walked with Joe. He used to work with our orchard.
Yep.
He knows Charles, so that's already a resource. He's given us a tremendous amount of information.
Yeah, okay. I was thinking of it more in terms of just if, to whatever extent the town wants to have more of a hands-on approach to it, and I'm not advocating that, but if that's an option, that's what they do there in Peabody. So
Right.
we, you know, if that's what we want to look at and see how it may work in operation, that's a field trip worth having. And again, that's not something I'm advocating, but that's something worth at least having on the table, that's an option.
It was very interesting. He mentioned how he says a lot of times people are thinking apple orchards are like they were in the 60s and 70s, and that's not the case anymore. And he says, prime example, 20 years ago, if a family of four came to pick your own, they drop maybe $30. He said, nowadays, a family of four, it's a C note because they want the cider donuts. They want, you know, the meat pies. They want this, they want that.
Right.
So he's been really interesting to talk to about business ideas.
And Jen, you raise an excellent point. It's funny. I have to hold back a smirk when I'm talking to people today who say, well, it's a no brainer. These things make money hand over fist. It's like, yeah, today they do, perhaps. But boy, that was not the case 30 years ago when we were looking at that. We couldn't find anybody who was interested.
Right. So there's so many really interesting options going forward, and it's such a big property. It doesn't have to be an all or none, in my opinion.
Right.
It can
Exactly. Yeah.
A lot of different angles we can come at this.
Yep.
But the first thing is the pruning,
Correct.
getting the trees, getting the orchard back to health.
Yeah. That being said, Madam Chair, I'm set for myself.
All right, great. Thanks, Paul. Will, do you have anything to share?
Just a few things that kind of had occurred to me. One was the fact that going to pick your own, you're looking for, you know, typically smaller, excuse me, 1 minute. Sorry about that. The pick your own trees, as Joe noted, were typically on a smaller variety and smaller size, dwarf size trees. One of the things that is lacking up at the orchard is a deer fence. Driving up around through Harvard, any of the productive orchards that they're spending money on fertilizer and spraying and pruning are protected from the deer. And I believe the reason it's protected from the deer is the deer will eat the lower buds off the trees. So if you're trying to cultivate for a pick your own market, you want the lower blossoms protected so that people aren't climbing in the trees to get the apples. One of the other considerations is having the fruit picked off the upper part of the tree before people go in so that people aren't climbing in the trees. Also, the H2A worker program has deadlines that, and I'm not familiar with the program. They have deadlines for applications to get labor for the season-long workers, which may be a consideration on our timeline, just to make sure that if it's, I don't know if a municipality can have H2A workers for seasonal labor or not, or how that works. But it's going to be a full-time job for, a number of people to manage those blocks over the course of the summer. And that's a major consideration going forward. And just, again, the last thing is the, irrigation of some kind for those blocks, because they're on the opposite side of the street, if I'm understanding correctly, from the water. So with it in the APR program, certainly the deer fence and a well are they're agricultural, fixtures or what have you. But the APR can be a little bit tricky where we're not replacing an existing well. We would potentially be creating a new well, and we're not replacing an existing deer fence. It's, creating a new, however you want to think about it, but structure. If it has to go through the special permitting process, then it's just a time thing. It seems reasonable that they would let us do it, but it would also, with the well, would change the area around, immediately around the well. So I don't know if it's worth looking into the APR program to find out about a deer fence and a well, to just, if it does come off dry and it needs to be irrigated, just setting it up for success. That's all.
Yeah, and I'll look into that more.
Will, those are great points. Can I take a moment to comment on just two of them? I deal with a lot of seasonal visas with my job, and so I'm happy to offer any input if anybody wants to know about visas. Certainly mine are cultural enhancement visas, which are J1s, but I can certainly help with the H and H2Bs. But Will, just to know that up on Nagog Hill, there is water there's a town water up there, which is how they fill those spray trucks as well. To my knowledge, over the years that I've walked through the orchard, which has probably been over 30 years, there's no irrigation up on those top blocks, and there never has been. So I don't know. There are certain sections that has had irrigation, which is over more by the barn, where you tend to have that rock that dries out as well. There are a lot of deer. Those deer come back and forth from my property to that property. I love that forethought of picking the top prior to the bottom. But I'm happy to help with visas, and I don't know that at the present time that we would really be looking at a well up on those fields that you're referring to, just because over time they've never had to have irrigation up there. I'll kind of double check, but in my memory, but I don't recall that we've had irrigation up there. Thank you.
And when I do my research on the APR over the holidays, I can look more into the deer fencing in the well and what it would take to make that happen. And then just to Will's point about the visas, it's also my understanding that because of COVID, they've really cut down the number of visas that are available for foreign workers. I don't know if they've lifted the number again or if it's stayed kind of steady. I don't know, Sarah, you might know more than me at this point.
I can give you guys an update. It hasn't necessarily been because of COVID. It's been because of prior politics that have gone in. So, but no, there are enough agricultural visas right now, but there is a time frame. In the high years, Charles probably had 6 to 8 that were there, and Calvin had been there for probably over, I think, perhaps 20 years or so. So legacy-wise, but I do not know, and Will brings up a great point of municipalities, if we can do that.
Okay.
And sort of in support of that, actually, Charles had provided us with a bunch of maps, which I'm going to have the building department scan. But also he provided us with a memorandum from the Department of Public Health Bureau of Environmental Health regarding certification of farm labor camps. So we're going to be looking at that and sending it off to also town council. Maybe that whole question as far as whether or not the town's able to do it, that would be something that we could get some assistance on evaluating.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
I think when we're going down that road, it would be interesting to know if the town can sub labor from another farm, because we obviously have some amazing farms in this town that use seasonal workers if we are allowed to sub them in as well.
I think that there's a pretty strict limit on how many hours a week they can work, and then it changes pretty drastically. I don't know if it's just in pay rate or how that works. There's a major agricultural bill that's getting circulated now in regards to that, and that it encompasses a lot more than just hours. It's a big ag labor thing that's going on, but I don't think that you can, because of the housing and because of the the way the program is set up. Would be difficult to do that.
Yeah, I think that the housing is an
typically
issue
the
with that.
employer is the one that has the housing and also holds the visa. But I don't know if the town can hold such visa.
There is housing at Sullivan's in Air, that different workers are they're housing there, and then there's also housing on farms, but it's a different. The housing is tricky for us to put something together that hasn't been up and running in the past recent couple of years. I think it's fairly involved, but I'm not fully aware of what is available up there. And if the house is empty or something, perhaps that's a possibility, but that's moot point at this point.
Okay. All right. So we'll have to do some more research on that. But that was great points that you brought up, Will, with respect to everything. So I wanted to talk about, Joe, you had shared with the group a map from the USDA. It was a comparison. Yes. Can you just go through that with the group in more detail? It was kind of like a then and now type of.
Yep. Yeah, I'm just getting ready to share.
Can someone do a screen share for me? I mean, like a screenshot. Saying I'm not on my computer.
Sorry, I'm just.
Thank you.
Why is this?
So, Joe, while you're doing that, it's so ironic, and I shared this with Jen, that back when this was first approved, I had these huge 3-ring binders of maps and everything on the committee to get this approved for preservation. I think it's important for us to come up with the overlay map to know which is APR, which is self-help funding, so that there may be some lots that we can, or plots that can allow more leniency for activities and others. And I have been struggling to find my records from 20 years ago, but I know they are on town file. I will ask Amy Green of Conservation if she has them as well. But I think it's nice for us just to have the historic piece of the overview.
Yeah.
All right, Sarah, just to ask you a question about what you said. You said that some of it is not covered by APR. I thought the whole property was covered by APR.
Well, so great question, Amy, but the funding came from 2 sources. So the funding came from APR, but it also came from what was then called the self-help grant.
Mhm.
And so that's the part that I think we need to make sure that we have details on. And my memory is just not as good as it used to be in terms of which funding came from that. APR is very literal. So say you have a field that's 10 acres that you're using for ag, but you have a buffer zone of like an acre around the whole path. They only were paying for the 10 acres that were in active agriculture, not the buffer.
Got it.
So-
Okay.
So in terms of funding, I just think for our historic piece, it's nice to kind of come back, and that's what I've been trying to work on to bring to this group, and I'll continue to work on that.
Yeah, and then
So-
just to probe a little bit more. So like, let's say we wanted to put in like a deep well. Could the deep well go in the buffer zone that's like not paid by APR?
Well, so when you're in ag, when we talk about buffer zones, as obviously I wear the conservation hat here. So you've got, agriculture has a little bit more of a leeway, is that you're 25 feet versus most people are, waivered 50 feet. So I don't anticipate doing really any work in buffer zones, but the APR doesn't really, to my knowledge, have a buffer zone that would be intrusive to any of our plans. But I just want to make sure that we have a map that really details that, and I hope to bring that to the committee for the next meeting.
Sarah, so I actually did some research. November 2nd, 2015 special town meeting has that map that talks about each of the parcels at the orchard, and which are considered self-help parcels, conservation, agricultural. So I can share that with you. That was just something that I found. I'm certain that Amy Green has something a little bit more detailed.
Yeah, I think that should be something that when we open our folders to this committee, we can stare at that. And I love the map that Joe gave us that is more derived from USDA. I think that's an awesome map.
Yeah, exactly. So we definitely have it. We just got to pull it out. So Joe, if you could just
perfect.
go back to sharing that
Yeah.
map, just to provide maybe a little more context to the group when you shared it to us, what we were looking at.
Sure. So this map, which we actually got a copy from Charles, and I've seen it referenced in other materials, and I thought I recall seeing something Amy had sent me as well. Basically, this is dating back quite a while ago into the 90s, that basically just divided up what the area that was subject to that. So what I had done was then also basically compared against GIS maps to try to just get an idea as far as when some of the changes had happened. So one of the things that we actually are fortunate to have is that we have different layers that then go back, like this one here is from the 1990s state aerial map. And you can see the distinct sort of difference between the rows, how compact the actual orchard was. And then I can sort of dial through successive years to then sort of see what those changes were. So I just tried, because I was trying to get an idea as far as what the overall understanding as far as what was subject underneath the USDA, because everything was sort of referencing these fields, and just identifying like what then the history was. And I in some ways was more curious based on the conversations that I had with Pat Kay and sort of like what fields end up changing the most. And that's where I just sent off sort of a marked up version of that map, just sort of identifying some of the very briefly history as far as when we're looking at these maps that had sent around, and then people looking basically on GIS, what had really changed.
Okay.
And it does give some context as far as really focusing in on the areas that have been most consistently maintained over the recent years compared to things that really have not been maintained, maybe for 10 or more years.
And were there any conservation pieces included in that map, or is that specifically all APR?
That's actually, I'd like to see, like Sarah had mentioned, that a distinction between the APR and then what other conservation and other funding. So I'd love to be able to see that as overlay,
Yep.
and I think Amy would be able to help with that.
Yeah, and this is something that we were actually on our just meeting last night, and that's something that Amy's doing town-wide, is going through the inventory. So I'll ask her tomorrow to focus on this for the next meeting, that I'll bring forth that.
Okay, I appreciate that. And I just wanted to mention to the group too, the email that Joe sent to this whole group was shared on social media by a resident who apparently got it from somebody in this group. And it was really unfortunate to me that that had happened, only because it seemed like it was taken out of context. Joe's summary that he provided at the bottom of the map was cut and pasted as if it was the residents' words. And also, we as a group hadn't had a chance to talk about this as a committee. So I'm just going to ask people to refrain from doing that. If Joe sends us something, I think his email was worded, "Hey, just thought this would be something fun to share with the group," and we hadn't even had a chance to talk about it yet to find out the context that he wanted to convey to us about this information. I think it's important that we just be cautious of what we do share with people, and I'm not really in favor of sharing information that's sent through an email to the committee until it's discussed in the public forum. I'm not sure if that's an open meeting law violation or not, but I just would ask people to not do that. And also, because it's a sensitive situation overall, we do have a tenant at the orchard that the select board is presently working with on sensitive matters. So I just think we need to be cognizant of what information we do share with others and on social media about this whole project. I mean, this is an important mission, so to speak, for what we're trying to achieve here. We're under a tight time frame. It's a sensitive situation, and we're trying, to move forward and do what's best for the town. And when things get posted on social media that are negative and derogatory, it honestly becomes a distraction. It becomes a distraction for me and other elected officials trying to address, noise on social media about something like this. So if we can just not do that, I would
like to address that if I can. I'm disappointed to hear that, and I feel as though this is a grounding moment that people have to realize why we're here in the context that we are a working committee, that I want to know that I am working with committee members that are as vested as I am. Obviously, we're giving of our time, but I realize we're in this for the betterment of our community. And going forward, I'm not willing to be part of a committee that people can't hold a standard of etiquette and quorum. So I am deeply troubled to hear that.
Thank you.
I don't want to pig pile, but I will just offer this, that I agree with everything that's just been said, and would only add this, that in context, our charge is, as a study committee, to bring a recommendation back to the board. We're not an advocacy group. We're not a group that really has a mission, an authorized mission anyways, to interact with the public on any of this. So I'll just add that.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Okay, so now update on orchard assessment and pruning.
Sorry. So a friend of mine had asked me what was happening with the orchard. And so I said, oh, here are some maps. Here's what it looks different. It looks different. But I didn't share it with someone for them to put it on social media.
Yeah.
And it's public information. So I did, and it was a map. So I was like, oh, look how it's different.
Well, actually, what happened, Amy, got posted on.
And I
two
didn't even
different-
know it was on social media until now, so.
Yeah, it's on 2 different pages, and it got Joe's comment that he put at the bottom to just kind of provide a summary for us, got cut and pasted in the context that it was coming from that resident. So regardless of what the intentions were, it was something that was shared amongst this group. We hadn't discussed it in a public forum yet.
Mhm.
So it's too bad, because it seems that that person didn't have the best intentions.
Do you know, can you tell me who it was? Because
Okay, so let's carry
Yeah.
on with this conversation. I don't think that that's important at this time. So
Yeah.
if the chair would like to carry on.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. Okay, so Joe, update on orchard assessment and pruning.
Yeah. So, I'm trying to think without sort of making it sound like a smart aleck remark. Did we already cover this?
I know, I just didn't
Yeah,
know
no,
if there was anything else.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah, Joe, I
So-
think that you've covered that. I think we can
all
move
right,
on.
we're good.
Yeah,
All right, great.
and just so the committee knows, because not knowing exactly, and we haven't discussed when our next meeting is, and also because I know that there's other conversations that are going on with other people as you sort of direct contacts to me. That's why I want to make sure that when I get sort of feedback from Sean or Pat K, that I let you know what that is, because I know we're all off doing some of our separate things. So once I get more details and have that conversation with John Clement with UMass, I'll be doing the same thing. Just put together a quick email giving you an update. We're in the process of nailing that time down. Should be sometime next week. Again, don't have the time yet. And then just following up on one more. On Saturday, I'm actually going to be having a call with Evan Chaput, to sort of go over, because of some of the feedback that not only had he provided with Paul, but also familiarity with the orchard. So I'll also provide the group with an update on that. And Cindy, I can work with you on sort of having more of a more easily digestible one-page sheet for pruning that then if people wanted to be able to distribute and would point back to me as the point of contact, then at least we're that would be great. And both Paul and Sean also said that they'd provide me with some contacts, Patrick and Sean, to reach out to as well as it related to pruning and to get the word out.
Okay, that's great, Joe. And I did a lot of research. I should have probably done this during member updates. It's really interesting, some of the summaries that are out there with previous reports that have been done for the town as far as open space and recreation, the way they talk about the orchard and the history of the land and all of that. I think that's something that's really would be great to pull together, just to give people a little bit more context and share a little bit too about Littleton, to Sarah's point, who we are, what values are important to us as a community, what the orchard means to the community and what we're trying to achieve. So that's something I can definitely, I've already started kind of pulling it together, but I can have a draft version of that and work with Joe on that for the next meeting. The other thing that I found that was really, I thought, cool were old town reports from like the early, oh gosh, how far back did they go? Way back. And they talk about how the Conservation Commission was involved with the orchard, just as far as managing it, taking care of it. And also, there was some information in there too about equipment that originally there was used highway department equipment that had got turned over to the orchard for use. But reading through the old reports, what it really made me realize is that the community was much more involved with the orchard when we first acquired it. And I think that's something that we lost along the way, is just having all these different important departments be more vested in the community on a day-to-day basis. So I'm hoping that that's something that we can recapture. These go back as far as 2005, 2001 annual reports talk about, how the community was more involved in the operation of the orchard. So I'm hoping, I'll share that with the group too, but I'm hoping that that's something that we can recapture through this process and just make this certainly better going forward.
So Cindy, that was probably pre Jack Morrison. Like,
yeah, I
that was-
know.
that was
Honestly,
going-
Sarah,
yeah.
I don't know. It's just interesting. It's just funny.
there was nothing about, it wasn't very community based back then. So.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, I think that's awesome. If we can go back and pull that back in, I would love to see that.
Yeah, no, I just thought it was kind of neat, and
Yeah.
like the land management stewards and
Yeah,
just, I don't know.
I'm
just-
happy. I'm happy to help you with that if you want.
Yeah, no, I just thought it was
Yep.
kind of neat. So,
Yep. Awesome. Yeah, I'd be happy to help with that.
thanks. Okay, so do we need to review the action item calendar? Do you want to go over that? Or do you think there's any changes from last time?
Are we adding some tasks on? I know I've brought a few that I'd like to bring to the next meeting. So in terms of updates on worker help visas and mapping as well.
Okay. All right, so, all right, this is what we have. I color coded us. I didn't color code us by people. I did it by task. So I can change that, maybe do it by people, by committee member champions. So what did you want to add to it, Sarah?
So I'd like to give the committee a history on farm worker updates. So with the visas and how they're held in the process for procuring those. And I will try and have access to town council to ask if the town can hold such visa. And then I'll work with Amy to try and bring forth some additional history and documentation with the maps for APR and self-help on the property.
Okay. And so with that, with the farm worker updates and the visas, in tandem with that, we do have the matters that Will raised as far as fencing and water supplies, and how, if there's any limitations with the fencing, what we need to do for APR land to get approval for those.
Will, can you ask, I know up in, is it Stowe or Bolton they've got some huge deer fencing that's up there, but I think they're on APR land. Maybe we can just, instead of reinventing the wheel, just ask one of those orchards what they did.
I'll see if I can get in touch with Carlson's. I think that some of theirs is on APR.
I don't think it's going to be a big issue because obviously rodent and that control is part of farm life. I don't think fencing is going to be an issue.
It's, I mean, I would certainly hope not. The other thing with that is also there's grant funding that's available for that. Some of that, the deer fencing through,
Perfect.
I don't know, NRC or somebody that allows for that. I can look into that, and happy to find out whatever information we have around on the orchard and maps or that sort of thing that we may have around here.
Okay.
For Cindy and for you, Sarah, to help with if you're looking for a historical kind of perspective, I might be able to help with that.
Okay. All right. And is there anything else we wanted to add?
I'll reach out to Patton Farms and see what I can drum up there.
Okay. Outreach, and then Joe's gonna finalize that RFP, and then I'll work with Sarah on the language, the summary language, and the conservation history.
See, a lot of that stuff actually already exists in terms of the history of the property, that sort of stuff. We had to do all that when we purchased the property in the first place, so it's there somewhere in the town files.
No, yeah, it's definitely there. It's just a matter of pulling it together.
Right.
Yeah. Paul, I think I can just try and find it of our original grant applications. Somebody
Yep.
has to, we just have to find the original document, so.
Okay. All right. So I'll update that calendar. Okay.
And we're meeting next Wednesday?
I know. What do you guys want to do? It's Christmas.
Can we skip?
I'm with you. I think we should skip. Should we skip?
So then the 29th.
To make ourselves feel less guilty, if we just funnel all our information in through Joe and we don't deliberate when he updates us, we'll be productive and not have to meet.
Perfect.
That sounds good to me. All right. So our next meeting will
Okay.
be the 29th. And we'll just filter everything in through Joe to Paul's recommendation, which is perfect.
I need to get football shoulder pads for all this. Extend the amount that I can put on my shoulder.
You're just gonna have to learn to delegate more, Joe.
And we have meeting minutes from November 10th and December 1st. Did everyone have a chance to look at those?
Yep. Look
Were
good.
there any suggested revisions? Comments?
Would someone like to make a motion to approve the minutes as written? Unless someone has any amendments.
Who's the clerk? The clerk ordinarily should be the one motioning it.
That would be Jane
Make a motion
Clancy.
No,
Oh, is it Amy?
it can be, no,
Oh.
Paul. It's a committee member. The clerk does not motion we take comments from all committee members. Any committee member can make a motion.
All right. Well, they can make a motion, but on our board anyway, the clerk always makes the motion on the minutes as the clerk's responsible for the minutes.
I'll make a motion to accept the minutes.
I
Second.
second.
Roll call.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah.
Since you're on Zoom,
So
you have
there's
to
been
roll
a-
call.
All right.
That's right.
There's been a motion made and seconded to accept the meeting minutes from November 10th and December 1st, 2021. Roll call vote, Jen Clancy,
Here,
Amy,
Yes.
Mr. Glady,
Yes.
Will Pickard,
Yes.
Sarah Seward,
Sarah Seward, aye.
and Cindy Napoli is aye, and the minutes are approved as written. Thank you. And that is it. So our next meeting is scheduled for the 29th of December. I hope everybody has an awesome, amazing Christmas and holiday.
Yep.
And
People will be out raking their yards tomorrow with this weather.
oh, bite
And
your
then we're
tongue.
going to be freezing 3 days from now. So, but I think I have enjoyed working with this committee. I think we take a moment and just reflect that, gosh, the weather has just been so volatile, and we certainly see that in New England, but our friends in the Midwest and that just are not as fortunate. So I think that when we sit around on our Christmas or whatever our holiday might be that we celebrate, if we do celebrate, that we have a lot to be grateful for here in Littleton, that's for sure.
Yep.
I'm
Well
into
said.
that.
Look forward to seeing you all in
All right.
person.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Take
All
care.
right, thank
Thank
you.
you. Be
Good
well.
night.
Bye.
Oh,
Bye-bye.
did we
Bye-bye.
adjourn?
Well, motion to adjourn.
Seconded.
At 7:09, motion to
Yeah.
adjourn.
Yeah, all those in favor.
Thank you, Joe.
Aye, yeah, thanks, perfect. Bye, Joe.
Okay, bye.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye-bye.